Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission I'm embarked on with a bunch of other booktubers in which we read Star Trek fiction for the remainder of 2021. And this first year of BookTrek, we're doing the normal canonical instantations of the show. So we started with the original show, the original series, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Then we move on to The Next Generation. That was all of September. And now in October, we're doing Deep Space Nine. And then we'll move on to Voyager and then Star Trek Enterprise to finish out the year. And Deep Space Nine, as I've mentioned on a couple of these videos, broke new ground for Star Trek. It was not a roving starship, for instance. It was not a white man in charge. It was not a captain in charge. Benjamin Sisko is a commander, and he takes over a space station called Deep Space Nine, which is right outside a gigantic wormhole that is a direct path. It's a huge, stable wormhole, big enough for ships to go through. That's a path to another quadrant of the galaxy, the Gamma Quadrant, which is largely unexplored by the Federation. They don't know what good stuff is over there, and they don't know what bad stuff is over there. And as soon as I got used to that premise in the first season of Deep Space Nine, I thought, well, okay, but what if something horrible came through that wormhole? What if there's an alien race in the Gamma Quadrant that wants to conquer the Alpha Quadrant, where all of the Federation, the Klingons, the Romulans are? What if that happened? Then if they were going to do that, the place they would do it, rather than travel 45,000 light years at one go, would be to use the wormhole. The wormhole doesn't appear to be guarded. There's a Starfleet deep space station in orbit around the planet that is near the wormhole, but there's no fleet station nearby. We're told that explicitly in the first few episodes of Deep Space Nine. And in that first season, I thought, well, okay, surely somewhere down the line, an invasion force is going to come through that wormhole, and then what would happen? And it took a while for the writers, the showrunners of Deep Space Nine. For all I know, they're very clever people. For all I know, they had the idea in mind right from the beginning. But it took them a while to embrace that idea and to come up with it and actually do that. And the device that they came up with was an alien race called the Dominion that comes from the Gamma Quadrant and makes allies in the Alpha Quadrant among the enemies of the Federation, makes an enemy of the Federation, and clearly expresses its desire to conquer all of the Alpha Quadrant. So that for those few seasons of Deep Space Nine, you're getting hugely broad-scale Federation history dramatized through the viewpoint of one particular crucial piece of the battlefield. It really was amazing. In terms of science fiction on TV, there was almost nothing like it. And certainly in terms of Star Trek, we'd never seen anything like it. It was kind of amazing. And because the cast was so good, generally speaking, for Deep Space Nine, there were, in those last few seasons, there were long stretches of every episode. Huge, long scenes that were so totally engrossing that you completely forgot that no character in that scene was human. It suddenly stopped being what Chancellor Azadbur disdainfully refers to it as a Homo sapiens only club. It started to reflect the diversity of species that we've always been told is in the Federation and in the rest of the Alpha Quadrant. And in those final seasons, when the Dominion War starts to become a reality, old fans like myself were saying, well, okay, the ultimate dream scenario in all kinds of fan fiction was always, what would happen if the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Federation all teamed up together against one foe? How bad would that foe have to be? And what if you threw in all sorts of other races as well? And in those final seasons of Deep Space Nine, you're watching every episode and you're thinking, well, the Cardassians, the militaristic space aliens that originally owned Deep Space Nine when it was Tarak Nor, have thrown in a lot with the Dominion, and you're watching every episode and you're thinking, but the Dominion doesn't care about them, and is certainly going to turn on them. They're just signing their own warrant to become slaves. And the Klingons are getting fractious and thinking maybe they need to fight the Dominion on their own, and the Romulans seem to prefer a non-aggression pact and certainly don't want an alliance with the Federation. And the whole time you're watching those episodes, you're thinking, no, you know how this is going to go. The Dominions are the ultimate big baddies. Sooner or later, every one of these old Alpha Quadrant enemies are going to become allies. That's certainly going to happen. And it does. In the course of the show. It does. And it's thrilling. Makes for absolutely thrilling TV, including some incredible space battles that have aged well. Even now, what is it, 15 years later? Some of those episodes are incredible to watch. And I'm not spoiling anything here, I would assume, but that's how Deep Space Nine ends. It ends with the end of the Dominion War. And also the end of a particular odd supernatural threat that's taking place right alongside the Dominion War. One particular Cardassian is trying to imbue himself with ultimate reality warping power. And that's never a good sign when any character in any incarnation of Star Trek does that. One of the very first episodes of the original Star Trek, Jim Kirk's best friend, Gary Mitchell, is imbued with that kind of individual godlike superpower. It seems to be the contention, first of Gene Roddenberry and then all of his showrunners, that could only corrupt absolutely. That would never make anyone good. But in this case, we need not worry, because the Cardassian that wants this ultimate power wants it for explicitly expressed mwahaha supervillain reasons to destroy and crush and whatnot. When the dust settles on all of those events, that's where Deep Space Nine ends. With Commander Benjamin Sisko out of the picture, with Constable Odo out of the picture, with Starfleet personnel moving on, not stationed on the station anymore, with a whole bunch of changes. The core cast of the show breaks up. Sometimes in some impermanent ways, in ways that you can't imagine changing again. Although the door is left open. With one exception only. Naturally, it was my favorite character in the original cast of the show. With one exception only, all of these characters could come back. Team up again, if they wanted to. But one of the smaller sideline details that happens in the climax of Deep Space Nine, the Klingon Empire is being run by a shrill, stiff moron called Gowron. He's a bad Klingon. He's the kind of Klingon that would have been pretty much the only kind of Klingon that Jim Kirk would have killed easily and without a second thought in the original show. He's a bad guy, even though he's in charge of the Klingon Empire, and even though Deep Space Nine continues Star Trek The Next Generation's tradition of making the Klingons three-dimensional, not just villains. And Lieutenant Worf, of course, is the security force. He's the head of security for the Deep Space Nine. On the Starfleet side, he's a colleague of Odo's. And he's a Klingon from an exiled house, from a disgraced and exiled house. And he has become close friends with General Martok, who leads the Klingon forces in battle all throughout the Dominion War. General Martok is played by J.G. Hertzler. J.G. Hertzler does an absolutely fantastic job bringing Martok to life, including one particular episode where Martok tells us basically his origin story, which is that he was a nobody, a commoner from the Ketha lowlands, not a member of any noble houses, no drop of noble blood. So, the noble blood rules the Klingon Empire. He didn't have any of it, and longed to serve the Empire, and eventually did as a galley hand, as a kitchen scrubber, on board a Klingon warship, and received a field promotion that put him in the ranks to rise to the level of captain. It's a fascinating story. Hertzler does a fantastic job in that episode. It's just a wonderful episode just in general. We'll get to episode breakdowns eventually. But one of the little side plot lines for Deep Space Nine that comes to fruition is that eventually Worf, in a Klingon council, calls out Gowron as being petty, foolish, and leading the Empire to defeat if he's not unchallenged. And Gowron he's blowhard, but he's not cowardly. And he realizes this for the challenge that it is, and right there in front of all the other Klingon councils, he challenges Worf to physical combat. And if you know your Star Trek: The Next Generation or your Deep Space Nine, you know how that's going to end. People, normal people, maybe not rogue androids or gods or whatever, but especially normal people and especially other Klingons are not going to win against Mr. Worf. And Gowron doesn't. He dies. Worf kills him. Which, in Klingon law, makes Worf the new Chancellor of the Klingon Empire, but Worf immediately defers that to Martok. It's a great story, really, of an ordinary person, a commoner from the Ketha lowlands, becoming the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire. The council immediately accepts Martok. He takes on the mantle and the giant cloak of the Klingon leader, and suddenly we have the prospect of a Klingon empire ruled by a guy we know very well. A gruff soldier who's nevertheless got a perfect moral compass and a sense of humor, and likes the humans that he's met in the Federation. It's a wonderful little feint towards the future. We don't get any sign of it. The show ends and we never hear of it again. The only thing we know is that Martok insists that Worf be his ambassador to the Federation. As he tells Worf, where else am I going to find an ambassador I can go targ hunting with? So Worf's life is about to drastically change as well. He's about to become a diplomat, the last thing in the world you'd expect of him, and maybe take a step out of Starfleet active service for a bit. I haven't read up to find out 100% for sure how fans reconcile that continuity with, for instance, the stuff that is in the backstory of Star Trek Picard, where it's strongly hinted in the show and outright stated in a novel that Worf becomes captain of the Enterprise. So he must re-enter Starfleet at some point. But that's how the show ends, with Martok as Chancellor of the Klingon Empire and Worf as his very reluctant ambassador. And there are a pair of novels. They were written by J.G. Hertzler, and that gave me pause. Not only because, in my experience, all the actors that I have known and loved in the course of my life have all been as dumb as African antelopes, which isn't any knock on their skill whatsoever. I used to know very well an actor whose name you probably know, who was as dumb as a post. You put him on stage, and you got magic you could feel all the way to the janitor's closets on the 3rd floor. No disputing that whatsoever. It had nothing to do with how well-read he was, or how sharp he was, or how much he could think his way out of a wet paper bag. It had nothing to do with that at all. And I assume, no matter how good a job, no matter how three-dimensional and grounded a job J.G. Hertzler does, I'm assuming that he's as dumb as Thistledown. So when I approached this book that is allegedly written by him, I had doubts. I had pause. And that was accentuated by the fact that this is not the first Deep Space Nine novel that I have read since last we talked on BookTrek. I've actually read 4 of them since then. 4 of them. Monday night, Tuesday night, and last night. Tuesday night, I read a Deep Space Nine novel that was so bad that I honestly felt that, like, the author on the cover had delegated the work to his little child. And I thought, well, that's going to put a bad taste in your mouth for the whole night, and you're done with the major book that you wanted to read tonight, so pick another Deep Space Nine novel and read it tonight. So I did, and it was almost as bad. It wasn't as bad as that first one, but it was abysmal, just abysmally awful. And I sort of sighed, and I cuddled with the bean for a while, and then the next night, I just randomly skimmed through. I have a ton of Deep Space Nine novels as ebooks. I randomly scrolled through, stopped at another one at random that I knew nothing about, read it, and it was terrible, absolutely terrible, so that I was getting to the point where I was going to come on here and start talking about the curse of Terok Nor, the curse of Deep Space Nine. I was going to start talking about that as an actual thing that exists. So I went to J.G. Hertzler's novel with trepidation. It's called The Left Hand of Destiny, and he has a co-writer, Jeffrey Lang. And this is book 1. There's 2 books in this series, and it takes place immediately after the last episode of Deep Space Nine. So Martok is newly installed as the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire. Worf is newly installed as his ambassador. And it was really, really good. This first book was really, really good. I'm looking forward to reading the second book tonight. So we might not have a book trek tomorrow unless I love the second book so much that I want to talk about it. This book, I don't know how much of the writing task Jeffrey Lang does. I have my suspicions. I don't know anything about J.G. Hertzler at all. I've never been to a convention. I haven't been to conventions in so long. The Deep Space Nine didn't exist the last time I was going to them. So I have no idea. I've never talked to him. No idea if maybe he's intelligent. Maybe he dabbles in writing on the side. But I am suspecting that Jeffrey Lang took up a great deal of the writing task involved in this novel, and mainly just consulted with his famous co-writer for character notes here and there. Nobody knows Martok better than Hertzler does. I don't know which of those is true, but Martok comes off wonderfully in this book, and so does Worf, and so do all the other characters, including, we tend to forget, when we meet Martok in Deep Space Nine, the first time that Martok and Worf ever meet is a tense moment that could actually have erupted in violence, because Worf has only moments before utterly humiliated Martok's son in physical combat. Hasn't killed him. Has just defeated him easily, like he was a baby, and disarmed him. And the meeting between Martok and Worf does not go poorly. It's tense, but it doesn't end in combat. And Martok takes on such a huge importance for the rest of Deep Space Nine that we tend to forget about the son. But there are all sorts of characters connected with Martok's personal life and also with his past. We get a lot about his past in this book, because it isn't just that story that he narrates about his rise in the ranks of the Klingon Empire. It's also the fact that for 2 years he was replaced by a changeling, by one of the shapeshifters who run the Dominion. For 2 years, the character that we thought was Martok was not Martok, and the real Martok was in a prisoner camp of the Dominion being fought for sport by the Dominion's genetically engineered soldier caste, the Jem'Hadar. Just day in and day out. No hope of rescue. No hope that an utterly hopeless plight. Martok had to fight. Of course, being a Klingon, he wasn't going to refuse. But he already guessed that a shapeshifter had taken his place and that no one knew it. So, literally, no hope. No one would even know that you were gone. That story ends wonderfully in the series. And that past, those 2 years, feature prominently in this book as well. It's really, really well done. It's heavy on the Klingons. But maybe I was unconsciously groping for that, because in Star Trek The Next Generation, in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, in even Star Trek Voyager, if you feel that proceedings are lagging a little, maybe getting a little dull, the surefire way to fix that is by adding in the Klingons. So maybe I groped for this just unconsciously, thinking that I should do that. But I'm glad I did, because I liked it a lot. I liked it enough to read the second one. So I will read the sequel, and I'm hoping that I'll love it. I'm hoping that it breaks the curse of Deep Space Nine. And then I might not talk about the sequel, because there'll be no way to talk about the sequel without spoiling it. I can set up this book just a little without doing that, but the sequel will be all payoff instead of all prelude. So I might read another book. I might read another Deep Space Nine novel in order to talk about it the next time. But either way, I am very glad that I have averted the curse of Deep Space Nine. So that's your book trek for today. The Left Hand of Destiny is actually good. I imagine the second one will be as well. Especially if you're interested in the character of Martok. This is as close as you get to an autobiography, to a long novel about Martok's life. That would be very interesting. That would be very interesting to write. But this is about as close as you get. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.